I'm so excited this afternoon to be joined by Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary under President Biden. Jen, so great to be here with you.
Great to be here with you. First of all, you fill so much of my all of my feeds. It's great to be talking to you live.
I'm so excited for this. I really am, because I really want to talk about kind of your tenure as White House press secretary compared to what we're seeing now from Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary under Trump. I guess talking about your tenure first, looking back to 2021, you enter the White House during the height of the pandemic. You're facing a lot of misinformation on the internet. What goes through your mind entering that briefing room every day?
Well, I remember my first day so well, in part because I couldn't figure out what to wear. And I ended up wearing this dress I'd had for 5 years because it was just so comfortable. But for me and for President Biden at the time, and for all of us, we were following the first Trump administration, of course. And it was a period of time where that briefing room was used to spread disinformation about everything from voting rights and laws and who won the election to COVID. And we wanted to take the temperature down and try to reset the room as being one where dialogue, back and forth, disagreement, debate was healthy. There was not yelling at reporters. You certainly had moments that were tense, but that it became again a room where we could provide accurate information. And it was the height of COVID, so that was especially front and center for us. It was just weeks after January 6th, and it was really about how do we take the temperature down? How do we change this room so that it is not a yelling room, but also not a forum for propaganda? We're not going to let people speechify about false information in here either. It's both. They sound contradictory, but those were the things I was thinking about.
Well, I got to ask you, because misinformation only grew since your tenure as press secretary. When you were in the briefing room, how did you handle it when, say, a Fox News reporter tried to ask you a question that clearly contained misinformation, but went viral on the internet? So, I mean, how did you handle that?
Well, first of all, we made a decision in the administration. We were going to call on Fox News because not calling on them gave them exactly what they wanted. Doesn't mean everybody agreed with that, but that was my view and the strong view of a lot of people I worked with at the time.
Yeah.
You look no further also, by the way, in present day than Mark Kelly appearing on a Fox Sunday show with Peter Doocy, my former sparring partner, and that completely driving Donald Trump insane just because Mark Kelly went out and stated the truth and the facts about this whole shutdown being about not extending healthcare subsidies. I use that as an example because not calling on Fox would have given them a reason to say the Biden administration is avoiding us. They're not acknowledging us. And was still a forum at the time, still is, I guess, where Democrats watch, independents watched, and you could use it as a way to give people tools to push back on a lot of the absurd propaganda they were hearing. Now, it's hard to draw the line sometimes, but there were moments where some people would get up and speechify about any range of things that was just projecting absolute false information. Either you cut them off at the pass and spat out accurate information, or you just cut them off and you say, we're done here. I didn't always like to do that, but sometimes it was necessary because you didn't want it to be a forum for propaganda. And sometimes people get in there and they give long speeches.
And looking back at that time, what was kind of the most impactful moment for you as press secretary, whether in the briefing room or just during the administration as a whole?
Oh boy. There were so many moments. I think that when you're in the communications, and anybody who's a public communicator, sometimes people think of that role as one where you're just trying to give talking points that go viral, right? Or trying to say something that is seen as funny or edgy. And really it's about how do you put something out there that moves the ball forward? And I think there were moments I'm proud of where we were able to use the room as a forum for pushing back against inaccurate information on COVID, but also to push legislation forward, whether it was the infrastructure bill or even the climate agenda, things like that. I don't know if there's one individual specific moment, but you always, when you feel like you're moving things forward in that room, that is when you feel like you've done your job for the day.
No, that makes sense. I got to ask you, because we see the White House press briefing room today. It's very different from when you were in or when you were at the podium.
It's very diplomatic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk about the differences in kind of mechanics as
Mhm.
well, because we're seeing under Caroline Leavitt and this administration that there is now an influencer seat, a seat that is devoted to new media, as they call it, but really over the past 9 or so months has been devoted to a Trump talking head. What is your reaction to that? Would you ever have imagined that happening in the press briefing room?
First of all, I'm so glad you're asking me about this because they are gaslighting America by telling people they are modernizing things by bringing people into this room. That room warrants modernizing. So let me start there. And there are good efforts to do that, which include bringing more regional reporters in, bringing more digital reporters in. That's a good thing. But they've sort of explained this as their effort to do that. But really what they're trying to do is reshape the faces of the people who appear in that room to be all pro-Trump propaganda like people. And it doesn't mean there are still excellent journalists in that room. But I only know the differentiation because I was in that room doing the briefing every day. If you're just consuming the briefing, all you see is reporters asking questions. There's a huge difference between Benny Johnson and, a reporter, Mary Bruce, right? But if you were just an American citizen trying to consume information, it's harder to differentiate. And they are slowly but surely, not that slowly, turning it over. So more and more questions in the room are from Trump influencers, people who start their questions sometimes. And you've seen these, you've put these clips out too, saying things like, I just want to first applaud the president for how patriotic
Right.
he is and how much he loves America. Or I just want to ask about his fitness routine. As you know, that was an actual question one day. That's not the purpose of the briefing room. There are days where it's brutal in there, right? Because you don't have good information. That's not the reporter's fault. Sometimes you just don't have new information to move the story forward. That's true for any press secretary, whether they're from a Democratic or a Republican administration. But they're reshaping who gets to have a voice in that room. And it's hard to differentiate and see that unless you've stood at that podium or sat in that room as somebody working in the press office or as one of the reporters. And that is the thing. It reminds me a lot of, I was at the State Department of spokesperson there for a couple of years, best prep ever for being the press secretary. And you would go to other countries and, you would do a press conference, say, Secretary Kerry would do one with Foreign Minister Lavrov from Russia, right? At the time when we were still working with Russia on some things. Their entire press corps was state-run Russian media, and they would raise their hand and ask questions. It was hard to differentiate from that if you're a viewer. And that is what it is turning into slowly but surely. And that should be a great concern, I think, to everybody.
Well, I was going to ask because a lot of people don't really understand kind of how the press briefing room operates. Who
Yeah.
decides really who gets a seat, who gets to go first? I mean, what does that even look like? Because behind the scenes, or at least publicly, everyone thinks, well, the White House just decides who gets a seat, which reporter gets to ask what question, but that's not really what it is, right?
It used to be that the White House Correspondents Association determined who had the seats in the briefing room. And there were certain traditions. Helen Thomas, who was still alive when I was in the Obama administration, always had the middle seat in the front row. She was a little 4 foot something, maybe she was taller than that, older lady, and still had that middle seat. The wire services, the major daily newspapers, the television networks. Now there is accurate critique of this because they are not all powerful as they were 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 30 years ago. And should they be the only ones who really get questions? Because by the time you've gone through the wire services and the daily newspapers, you have a hard time making time for other people in the room. That is a good critique, and one that should be changed if we get through this moment of a hellscape on our democracy. Let's all hope. But that they've changed that. They've also changed who is in pools. And a pool, which is such a funny term, I realize, is a group of people who travel with the president always. And the history on this is a little dark. It's to ensure that if a president is killed, honestly, or injured, that there's always reporters there to document it for history.
Right.
There's a lot of history around this. I mean, there was a group of reporters who were with Bush on Air Force One on 9/11. Have been groups of reporters who have been around in modern history, president who's survived assassination attempts. That's the purpose. They have changed who's in that pool. So then that makes you question. And historically, it's been the three wire services that are not, they're just straight news services, right? A rotating daily newspaper, a rotating network pool who shares all the footage with other pools. And what that does, it's just documenting for history. And now when they add Kremlin-esque Trump reporters into that, it's changing the documentation for history. And that may sound nerdy and historian-like, but it's important because it is projecting upon the public a depiction of events, whether it's an Oval Office moment or it's a moment on the trail. And these are these small-ish shifts that do change the kind of information that's provided to the public.
I have to ask you, if you had to grade Karoline Leavitt as press secretary, A through F, what would it be?
I mean, I'm not going to give her a grade, but here's what I would say. She's has a commanding presence. And I say that because there've been a lot of people in that room who shrink in the job, right? And don't know how to kind of banter with reporters. So that is good that she does that effectively. She's completely shifted who's in the room and who's asking questions. So her job should be graded massively on a curve because it's easier than almost anybody who's ever had that job, including people who were the press secretary for Trump in the first term, because you're changing which reporters get to ask questions. And if half the reporters who are asking questions are I don't know if they're given questions by the Trump administration, maybe they're not, but they're going to ask things that are immediately complimentary of Trump. That is a different job than the one that most of us have done in the past. I also think there is which happened during the first term too, sort of a yelling at reporters for asking very valid questions, which, hey, I had moments of being frustrated with reporters. We're all human, but that seems like it's a common thing that happens, which is actually not. The whole thing, the banter back and forth, is part of democracy happening, and you just have to find a way to keep your cool.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but when you were White House press secretary, what trended when you were on the podium were Psaki bombs. And, and actually, Midas Touch, one of the groups that helped coin that term, created socks with your face.
Oh, socks. Okay.
Sockies.
Oh, okay. I love it. Okay, that's so fun.
I figured I'd tell you about those. But you left the podium. You're now at MSNBC. I guess. How's the transition been like from being behind the podium to now being theoretically a journalist yourself, having your own show and kind of doing the work that the folks asking you the questions were once doing?
It's been a really fun transition. There are things like learning how to read a teleprompter, which is really not a natural thing anybody knows how to do immediately. But it took me a little bit of time to feel comfortable in my own skin on the show, because there's a part of it. And I give this advice to people who are, even if they have different backgrounds than me, who are starting shows or things. It's like, don't just be yourself, right? You will learn how to read the teleprompter. You will learn all these things. It is, if you come to the show informed and knowing that my job for an hour every night is to help people understand something that is perplexing, confusing, or bizarre, right? And provide them with information they didn't know before, so hopefully they can tell their neighbors. That's a good bar. Do I accomplish that every night? I hope so. Maybe not. But it's taken some time to realize for me, I know a lot of things about a lot of random things, like government shutdowns and strikes being, strikes on foreign countries and what happens in the Oval Office. And what role I can contribute at this moment is helping people understand what's normal, what's not, and what they should be paying attention to in some regard.
And before I let you go, what's next for Jen Psaki? You have this MSNBC show. Is there anything coming down the pipeline that folks should know about?
Yeah, I mean, so we're about 5 months into the 9 p.m. show. I can't believe that, 5 months. I did a first season of this podcast called The Blueprint, which was a therapy project. I'm going to call it that because it was what the hell just happened in the election and where do we go from here? And we're going to do a second season, which launches next week. That's really about the path forward because I think there's not enough time on my show to even talk about the party that's out of power. And I think it warrants a lot of attention and discussion. There's not also massive agreement within the Democratic Party about a lot of things, like what fights to fight, what things to elevate and what not, how much is generational change a part of it. So we're going to dig into and talk about all of that. We're also going to launch a newsletter that's all about politics because that's one of my many loves. But that's all. Let's see, what day is today? Yeah, launching next week, all of it.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here first. Jen, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Hey folks, Aaron Parnas here. Thank you so much for watching The Parnas Perspective. Please consider subscribing to support our work as we grow this independent news media entity into something that rivals mainstream every single day. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.